Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 31. Waiting passively for a windfall. Late night. Exorcism Department. Zhenshi. Hung Jun and A Tai hurried back to the exorcism department, but no Carpiao or the others were seen. Where are they? Hung Jun asked in bewilderment. Hung Jun frowned. Hanging in his hand were the drops of liquid coated with his pentacolored sacred light. They waited in the exorcism department, but Li Jinglong, Mo Rijin, and Chu Yangxi still didn't return, and the Carpiao who had gone to notify them was also nowhere in sight. Let's go out and look for them, A Tai said. By this time, the two of them were already aware that something had happened, and returned to their initial parting place in front of the Juku Bridge and searched along the river course once more. When daybreak arrived, they still found nothing. When they returned to the exorcism department, Hung Jun couldn't stand it any longer and went to sleep first, while A Tai still waited. It was already noon when Hung Jun woke up. None of them came back. A Tai muttered, there was more than one trap last night. All three of them were ambushed by Yaoguai. Hung Jun thoroughly panicked. Quite possibly, A Tai mused. This dark sorcery is almost too much for even us to handle. Hung Jun furrowed his brow as he held up the pentacolored sacred light, in which were locked the drops of blood found in the secret passage last night. The drops of blood were fluctuating in shape. This is bad, Hung Jun said. We have to go look for them. What to do now? Don't get worked up, A Tai replied. Doesn't Zhenshi still have a superior? Let's go and see him. Yang Kuozhong, Hung Jun replied, we still have no idea whether or not he's the Yao King. What should we do if by any chance he is the Yao King at the Emperor's side? Let's try him, A Tai had a sudden idea. If he is, he will surely lead us to a trap just in time to save the others. Hung Jun and A Tai then went to the Chancellor of the Right's mansion. They, however, only received a reply that the Chancellor of the Right had gone to the west and was not in Chang'an. As they pondered their next move, Hung Jun thought of requesting help from the Judiciary Department, but A Tai felt that it was inadvisable to drag mortals into this matter. After all, what they couldn't solve would only harm the mortals, so it made little sense to bring them in. A Tai and Hung Jun were already at their wits' end as they came out of the Chancellor's mansion. What should we do? Hung Jun asked once again. A Tai. The two looked at each other for a moment, then A Tai said, let's search for them again. If you succeed in finding one of the traps, you may then find a way. Let's try to look for them separately. Hung Jun said. The two then agreed that no matter what they found, they should not act rashly and must take the news back to the exorcism department to discuss it. Furthermore, regardless of whether they obtained something or not, they would have to return to the exorcism department before the evening drum. Hung Jun's third search along the river course yielded no results. Time slowly passed. In the afternoon, when Hung Jun passed through the western street of Chang'an, the noisy marketplace was packed with people. However, he only felt a sense of fear as he felt like there were countless pairs of eyes watching his every move in broad daylight. And all his movements were under the control of the enemy. At the thought of that, Hung Jun felt a strong sense of insecurity and then subconsciously went back to the exorcism department, as if only the shrine of Akala was the safest place. A Tai? Zhenshi? Are you all back? Hung Jun shouted as he pushed open the gate. A Tai had yet to return, while Li Jinglong and the other three had already been missing for nearly 8 hours. Even Zhao Zilong was nowhere to be seen. Hung Jun had never been as flustered as he was now. Li Jinglong wasn't even able to use a mana yet. Those Yaoguai from before had been burned to death. If the Yao King retaliated for that, he was afraid that the consequences would be too horrible to contemplate. What to do? Hung Jun was about to go berserk. This was completely beyond his abilities. He walked round and round in the courtyard. No, Hung Jun let out a deep breath and calmed himself down. What would Zhenshi do if he were here? Looking around aimlessly will not solve anything. Hung Jun forced himself to settle down first. As the sun set, he sat cross-legged before the table, and began to gather his thoughts. First of all, they must have been taken, Hung Jun muttered. There's no other explanation. Under the premise that Li Jinglong, Mo Rijin, and Chu Yangxi had all stepped into the same trap that they had also encountered, and that they didn't have the pentacolored sacred light to protect them, then it was quite likely that they failed to deal against this creeping blood. Supposing that Li Jinglong used a sword, Mo Rijin used the 7-nailed arrows, and Chu Yangxi used his inexplicable drawing skills, they were all still no match for that Gui-like Yazi. So then they were wounded, captured, or killed in reprisal. Hung Jun shivered as he thought of it and forced himself not to think so. What would Li Jinglong say if he was here? Is there a reason for the Yao King to kill them? Hung Jun asked himself, imitating Li Jinglong's voice, and then answered himself, the Yao King will not kill them so rashly. If they wanted to take their revenge, they would eliminate them all in one go. That still didn't seem to constitute a reason for not killing them. In spite of this, Hung Jun convinced himself that Li Jinglong shouldn't have been killed once he was caught. Because I haven't been caught yet, Hung Jun said. It's still adjustable, yes. After forcibly convincing himself, he asked once again, in that case, where were they taken? Would that wounded Yazi? No. Yazi was wounded. Perhaps it will go to find the Yao King. Hung Jun leapt at once and rushed like a gust of wind, but then remembered that A Tai still had not come back. It was already getting dark. Hung Jun stood at the entrance for a moment. His intuition told him that the evening drum had already passed, and that the only possible reason of not seeing anyone was that A Tai had also been captured. Hung Jun. He turned to look around and realized that he was the only one left. Impossible, Hung Jun muttered. It was strange to say that in this dark night, the sense he had of being watched during the day had conversely lessened. It was as if the gathering darkness had hidden the Yaos from view and become their best protection. And yet, it also kept Hung Jun in the darkness. He climbed several steps to the tallest building in Golden Lane, overlooking the whole city. Every household in Chang'an shone with lights, a few red lanterns hung high, as dark clouds drifted over the moon, and the sound of music and laughter wafted across from far away within the city. He carefully returned to the front of Jukwa Bridge, along the river course, and towards yesterday's passage. The underground space was quiet, and the walls were still dripping with water. Under the pentacolored sacred light's illumination, the surroundings had been ruined by yesterday's clash. Hung Jun dived into the water without taking off his clothes. Sure enough, there appeared a wide passageway under the water, and he swam along towards it. As he reached his last gasp, everything then became clear before him. He carefully rose to the water surface and found blood-stained footprints on the shore. This was already a moat outside the city. Footprints went all the way out, and there was a trail of blood along the overwhelming underbrush along with a few scales fallen beneath the trees. Hung Jun's heart beat violently. Taking out his throwing knife, he tracked all the way along the footprints and the bloodstains. However, the others were still nowhere in sight. In case there were other Yaogwai, it was hard to say whether he could defeat them all himself alone. The footprints came to a stop in front of a mountain wall before disappearing. Hung Jun. Gone? He looked around. How was that possible? The moon rose through the misty clouds, throwing out long beams of moonlight, illuminating the mountain rock wall and giving it a reflective black luster. Holding the throwing knife's handle, Hung Jun approached and tried to rap at the mountain wall, but there was nothing. At that instant, Hung Jun silently fell straight into the mountain wall. This wall was a false front. The moment he fell in, he almost cried out, but fearing that he might alarm an ambush, he desperately held himself back. Behind the mountain wall was another tunnel 10 feet deep. Hung Jun had no time to prop his pentacolored sacred light as he stumbled and rolled down the small tunnel, throwing up countless silt, and finally falling into a cave in the mountainside. That hurts, Hung Jun said in a low voice. The cave gleamed red, coming from a deep red magical array carved on the ground. Yazi's footprints and blood trail dragged here before they really disappeared. Hung Jun looked over his shoulder at the magical array on the ground. It was exactly the same as the one he had seen in Yazi's hiding place the other day. In the center of the array was placed an empty copper plate. What spell is this? Where did Yazi go? Hung Jun thought about the trap that Atai had shouted out about last night. Perhaps that hadn't been a trap, but rather, when the two of them discovered the array, Yazi had just happened to return, and then they at the same time had triggered the self-protection mechanism of the blood droplets in the array. The blood droplets should be placed inside the copper plate. As long as the plate didn't leave the array, it wouldn't attack. Hung Jun wasn't actually afraid of it. After all, his pentacolored sacred light could block everything. He undid the bonds of the blood droplets that he had obtained the night before, and let them fall back into the copper plate. It looks like a medium. Hung Jun frowned as he scratched his head. How did the wounded Yazi flee to here? There was no other way, that was to say, Yazi had to have left through this array. Then this magical array. Hung Jun looked down for a moment before he knelt on one knee and then stood beside the last footprint of Yazi, which happened to have a mysterious symbol in it. He put his hand on it, trying to pour in his mana. The array grew brighter, immediately followed by spewing tiny drops of blood out from the center of the copper plate, popping like fireworks in all directions. As Hung Jun strengthened his mana, the spewing tiny drops of blood spread even wider, and soon became like a fountain. It also spewed out of the copper plate and then fell back into the array, which immediately was activated as the rays of light grew extremely bright. Hung Jun. As soon as the array burst into a bright light, Hung Jun didn't have time to react as a buzz sounded, and then he was gobbled up by the rays of light. Then came another buzz. Hung Jun felt himself suddenly dangling aloft as his body fell uncontrollably. Accustomed to not shouting in the face of shock, he sharply flipped in the air and flicked out his throwing knife in preparation for any unexpected situations. However, the moment he turned around, he was suddenly startled by what greeted him. He saw himself. A young man who looked exactly like him flew towards his direction with an evil smile at the corner of his mouth and holding 3 of his throwing knives. Hung Jun. What's going on here? Hung Jun and his mirror image collided into each other fiercely in the air. In an instant, he raised his throwing knife to block, but with a loud swish, the young man turned into drops of deep red blood and scattered in all directions. Then, the blood droplets converged again, turned into a hand, and plucked the peacock plume from around Hung Jun's waist. Who are you? Hung Jun snarled. Hung Jun. Li Jinglong's voice roared. Hung Jun subsequently threw out his throwing knife, but suddenly slammed into his own pentacolored sacred light. His throwing knife that was in midair was engulfed and taken away by the fluid. In front of him, the sea of blood drew closer and closer until Hung Jun fell into it. Hung Jun. The fourth one. Lady Qiaoqiuo's voice laughed. Hung Jun gasped, struggling in the midst of a sea of blood before looking up at the top of the cave, where there was a flashing magical array. He suddenly realized that this was the last trap. He wanted to conjure up some magical fire when the sea of blood came roaring in thick and swift, wrapping him around tightly as Yazi rushed up from the shore. Li Jinglong roared again, "Stop!" Hung Jun had just released the fire spell when he was bitten on his shoulder. With dripping blood, he cried out in pain and was thrown up into the air, flying towards the shore. Struggling, all his strength was suddenly drained, and the mana in his meridians also disappeared without a trace. Lady Qiaoqiuo stood in front of Hung Jun, murmuring and chanting mantras. As her bloodless lips slightly parted, Hung Jun's body emitted rays of light that were sucked into Lady Qiaoqiuo's mouth. "Stop it! Stop!" Tied up in an iron cage inside the cave, Li Jinglong couldn't stop banging his shoulders against it, and shouted to Lady Qiaoqiuo. "Come drain from me! Don't touch him!" Hung Jun was continuously rolling on the ground. His whole body was covered with thick sticky blood, and thus he couldn't struggle up. Hung Jun's mana was being continuously absorbed by Lady Qiaoqiao, and she was exceptionally elated. For the first time in her life she had sucked in such a pure mana. Her whole body couldn't help but tremble under the nourishment of this mana, and even her face subsequently deformed, showing a ferocious fox Yao face. End chapter. Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 32. A desperate counterattack. The three savage beasts that were Yazi, Suani, and Baxia, approached slowly. Lady Qiaoqiao chuckled coldly before reaching a hand out from under her robe, preventing the three Yao from moving forward. Then with a casual sweep, the metal chains on the ground flew up on their own, wrapping around Hung Jun and dragging his unconscious form into an upright position, causing his back to collide with the wall of the cavern. Hung Jun let out a pained groan, slowly sliding down into a sitting position with his head lurching forward. His consciousness was murky, and his vision was filled with ghostly afterimages. Just one more left, Lady Qiaoqiao said warmly, and the entire exorcism department will have fallen. Even now, are you still holding on to the hope that your companions will come to save you? Li Jinglong's dashing official uniform had already been torn. His shoulder and his back were covered in wounds from sharp teeth, and purple-black blood dampened the cloth of his martial robe. When he lifted his eyes again, his gaze was so angry it seemed as if he could set them all on fire with his eyes alone. Name your conditions. Li Jinglong said darkly. Conditions? Oh please, wake up. Lady Qiaoqiao, however, began to laugh. She said, do you know why it wasn't until now that I raised a hand to defeat you? Li Jinglong didn't reply, only staring anxiously at Hung Jun, who was sitting behind Lady Qiaoqiao. Hung Jun lifted his head slightly, feeling that his entire body was weak beyond compare, and he was in intense agony as if his bones had been shaken loose from their frame. Because you pose no threat to me, Lady Qiaoqiao said in a low voice. Li Jinglong, you were born immortal, and if you didn't interfere with matters that didn't concern you, then perhaps you may have even died peacefully of old age. Are you, the Yao King? Hung Jun asked brokenly. Lady Qiaoqiao turned around and looked Hung Jun up and down, before saying indifferently, I am. The Fox Yao, are all your subordinates, Hung Jun said painfully. Speaking of this, Lady Qiaoqiao turned and walked towards the Blood Sea, speaking in a quiet voice. When you all burned my tribe members to death, did you prepare yourselves to die today? Yes. Hung Jun, still kneeling in the corner, lifted up his head to look at Lady Qiaoqiao as he spoke quietly. Do you want to know why? If you come over, then I'll tell you. In that instant, Lady Qiaoqiao's expression changed. She furrowed her brow deeply as she looked consideringly at Hung Jun, before she began to walk slowly towards him. It was me who gave the order to kill them, Li Jinglong suddenly blurted out. It has nothing to do with Hung Jun. When he said this, Li Jinglong could tell that Hung Jun wanted to gather up all of the energy in his body at once to ambush Lady Qiaoqiao, but this plan would not work. He shook his head slowly towards him, trying his best to persuade him to stop. Why did you choose to do this? Hung Jun furrowed his brow as he spoke. Isn't it enough to just be a Yao King? Why did you kill people? When Lady Qiaoqiao heard these words, she began to laugh, and she said quietly, how can you be this naive? But when Hung Jun looked at Lady Qiaoqiao, there was a trace of pity in his eyes. You like Chang'an, and I like it too. Hung Jun's gaze was grieved as he spoke. But can you not survive without doing what you did? Within Lady Qiaoqiao's eyes appeared a sliver of surprise. Of all the inhabitants of this world, only Hung Jun would be able to ask such a thing. That, you'll have to go ask De Renja. In this instant, her expression filled with viciousness. It was he who first struck out against the Yao tribes, killing all of them and sparing none. Fox Yao are the Yaogwai that are most like humans, Hung Jun said quietly. You all have accepted the torment that comes with being born as Yao, but have also tasted the joy and grief of humans. Correct, Lady Qiaoqiao said, almost coldly. Now, I've come to realize that everything has been wrecked by these fictitious emotions. If Jin Yun hadn't fallen in love with that lad and become so unwilling to discard the body, hiding it underneath her bed so that she could have him buried later under the earth and be at peace, then we wouldn't be where we are today. When he heard this, Li Jinglong startled. From the cat that escaped out of Lady Qiaoqiuo's manor, to the act of hiding in Jin Yun's room and discovering that dried corpse under the bed. You've been to Pingkong Li. You went to go see Jin Yun. Li Jinglong's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. It was definitely because that cat saw your fox Yao form that it led us over there. Lady Qiaoqiuo sighed. I also didn't expect that after arguing with Jin Yun for so long, it would be a cat of all things that wrecked our plans. Before you die, is there anything else that you want to know? Ask, I'll let you ask your fill, either way, you all are dying today. Li Jinglong lifted his head and observed Lady Qiaoqiuo, before he spoke. What's in the blood pool? Lady Qiaoqiuo said gently, that is blood, the collected blood essence of all of the humans. After the Fox Yao consumed their hunpo, they gained the power to transform into humans, and the blood essence that they absorbed would be sent here, entering the blood pool. After the imperial examinations, I kept thinking about how exactly I would lure you all here. Because this is the most useful thing I have. It's my other child. She turned and looked towards the blood pool, saying, to fill this blood pool, fresh blood is necessary. And you all would never let any go of any gossamer thin trace of a clue. That's a transfer array using blood as the medium, Hung Jun breathed while he looked towards the blood pool in the center of the cavern. The huge blood pool roiled constantly, and the transfer array glowed slightly as it hung high above the surface of the blood. Correct, Lady Qiaoqiuo gently spat out that word. You smart people always feel that as long as you felt along the vine to the melon, then you'd be able to figure out my whereabouts and my plans, but how does it feel to instead be led one step at a time into a trap? Otherwise, you think that Yazi would be so foolish as to leave behind a scale at a location where it gathered blood? Hung Jun. A clever person can be ruined by their own cleverness, Lady Qiaoqiuo laughed. But this blood pool is not something that you can lay your eyes on so easily. It contains the power of the fox tribe and was refined with the fresh blood of mortals. I used so much effort, spending a whole 10 years to get it to the stage it is at today. Through the process, every drop of blood that joined it lent it a fraction more of the ability to change into a human form, Lady Qiaoqiuo said mildly, the corner of her mouth crooked up in a slight smile. But why would it turn into me? Up until now, Hung Jun was still in disbelief about the instant that he had seen himself in the blood pool. That is all thanks to Li Zhenqi's sword, Lady Qiaoqiuo smiled. Yesterday he handed it over to me of his own accord. Do you like it? Hung Jun suddenly remembered that when the exorcism department met for the first time, and he had clashed head-on with Li Jinglong, his finger had been slit open in that instant. And now, as long as the last mortal's blood is added in, Lady Qiaoqiuo said gently, then everything will be complete. It's a pity that none of you will be able to witness that. Who do you want to turn it into? Li Jinglong felt a series of chills along his back. Impossible. Hung Jun raised his voice. You can't touch the human realm's son of heaven, he has the protection of the Ziwei star. That is true, Lady Qiaoqiuo said, but I can keep him under house arrest and switch him out with an identical emperor, and then who will find out? No one, aside from my idiotic mortal younger sister, isn't that right? Li Jinglong couldn't stop breathing heavily. Are you done with your questions? Lady Qiaoqiuo asked gently. If you have nothing else to say, then I'm going to go ahead. An impulse flashed through Li Jinglong's mind, but just as he was thinking about dragging things out to buy themselves some time, Lady Qiaoqiuo said, trying to buy yourself more time is useless, Li Zhenqi. This is a pocket dimension that I created with my own magic, and even if you all managed to escape your bonds, without my transfer spell, you'll never be able to leave this blood pool. After saying this, she slowly walked towards Hung Jun, and Li Jinglong's breaths grew harsh. What are you trying to do? Hung Jun asked, his voice shaking. I'll tear out your nerves, peel off your skin, Lady Kuo said, all prim and proper, and lynch you in front of Li Zhenqi. First, I'll slice open your scalp and slowly peel off your pretty face, letting all your blood run dry, before finally eating your hunpo and turning into you to then lynch your superior and your companions. How does that sound? Hung Jun. Li Jinglong. For a while the cavern was only filled with the sounds of multiple people breathing. Lady Kuo lifted a hand and caused Hung Jun's body to float up, before saying, I haven't seen your magical artifacts yet, let me take a look. Your throwing knives seem to be very sharp. Baxia, bring his artifacts over. Baxia shifted into his human form, and with 2 hands he offered up Hung Jun's artifacts. Should I use this throwing knife, or? Lady Kuo glanced at him carelessly, but when her gaze caught on the jade peacock plume, she couldn't help her swift change in expression. You? When Lady Kuo looked back at Hung Jun, her expression was of disbelief, and her voice shook. Where did this artifact come from? No, it shouldn't be, you're someone from Yaojin Palace. Hung Jun didn't even blink as he gazed at Lady Kuo. If you lift even one finger to harm me, Hung Jun murmured, my dad will burn you to ash. Exaggerated, shrill laughter suddenly burst out of Lady Kuo's mouth. Ha ha ha, you think this old woman is afraid of him? Lady Kuo jeered. Someone who suffered defeat at my hands? I should send your bones up the Taihang Mountains, and see if he can do anything then. Lady Kuo lifted up one of the throwing knives, coldly observing Hung Jun. Stop! Li Jinglong called. Lady Kuo. Do you have anything else to say? Lady Kuo sighed and closed her eyes. None of you will be able to escape. Li Jinglong, you can't convince a mother to forgive the murderer who killed her son. It was me who did it, Li Jinglong entreated. Since you have some history with Hung Jun's father, then have him smell some Lihun pollen and forget about all of this before sending him off alive. Isn't that much better? Lady Kuo turned her head to observe Li Jinglong. Li Jinglong continued, though I don't know what past history you have, it's better to resolve enmity than to let it stew. If you lynch me and let him go, then you'll have one less enemy. Isn't that much better? Lady Kuo enunciated each word clearly. Li Jinglong, do you know what his birth father has done? If you knew, then you wouldn't say those words. Li Jinglong. His father killed my younger sister, Lady Kuo said darkly. And now, at last, his son has fallen into my grasp. Hung Jun. Lady Kuo lifted the throwing knife. With all the strength in his body, Hung Jun tilted his head, trying to use the last of his energy to call the throwing knife back to him so that it would pierce Lady Kuo's throat in one go. But all of the mana in his body had already been sucked dry, and he couldn't summon even this little bit of energy. But just in this instant, one of the rings on Lady Kuo's hands began to shine. She stopped in her movements and hesitated for a moment, before using the throwing knife to slice open a streak on Hung Jun's forearm, creating a bloody opening that spurted out fresh blood. It hurt so much that Hung Jun let out a loud shout. Lady Kuo said towards those 3 monsters, Baxia, go find that Talk-Aryan person and bring him back, Yazi and Suani, stand guard over them. Don't let them die, I will be back right away. The 3 Yaogwai nodded. The ring on Lady Kuo's finger flashed again and again, before with a wing, she vanished into thin air. Li Jinglong was trembling uncontrollably as if he was about to collapse, and when Hung Jun lifted his gaze, their eyes met. But then Yazi came towards them, pressing one knee against Hung Jun's abdomen. Hung Jun coughed violently, his entire body sore and aching as he collapsed onto the ground, dragging those metal chains with him. Do you want to eat a little something? Yazi lifted Hung Jun up from the ground by grabbing his hair as he spoke. How about swallowing a knife? Hung Jun couldn't stop panting, but the other black-clothed man called Suani said, don't kill him. The Tokharian is mine, Yazi answered, before letting go of Hung Jun. His abdomen still bore the blackened wound that the fireball explosion had left, and he staggered along to the edge of the blood pool and sank in, letting out a muffled groan. I'm going, the black-clothed man named Baxia said. He scooped up a little bit of the blood in the blood pool, and with a shua he turned into a black ball of fire, shooting into the array on the ceiling, disappearing just like that. Li Jinglong watched Baxia's movements, but when Suani noticed Li Jinglong immediately averted his eyes. Even then, Suani still found out, and he started walking towards him. Don't beat him up. Hung Jun slumped on his side on the ground, saying with difficulty, he's immortal. Suani smiled coldly before opening the cage door. Just as Li Jinglong was about to strike out at Suani emitted black energy that coiled around Li Jinglong, stopping him from moving, then dragging him out and slamming him heavily against the wall. Li Jinglong smacked into the cavern wall and immediately fainted. Hung Jun let out a loud shout, and Li Jinglong fell over on one side, falling heavily next to him. Suani jeered at him. Trash! Hung Jun widened his eyes. Upon seeing that Li Jinglong was all bruised and battered, with blood seeping slowly out of his nostrils, flowing onto the ground, he couldn't help but begin to shiver. Suani was even too lazy to even toss Li Jinglong back into the cage. He turned and left, heading towards the higher ground of the cavern, vanishing behind a stone pillar to do who knows what. Hung Jun reached out a hand, trying to feel for Li Jinglong's pulse, but the unconscious Li Jinglong moved and gently grabbed his fingers, opening his eyes and making a shh motion with his lips. With this, Hung Jun finally calmed. He and Li Jinglong were no more than a chi apart, and both of them were lying on the ground, looking into each other's eyes. Their surroundings were filled with silence, broken only by the sounds of bubbles popping in the blood pool. In Hung Jun's eyes, when Li Jinglong looked at him unblinkingly, time seemed to slow down, but it was still flowing, only because he saw Li Jinglong's eyes grow red, and his throat bobbed gently as he struggled to hold back his sobs. His tears flowed down along the bridge of his nose, slowly dripping to the ground where it mixed with the fresh blood. His lips moved slightly, forming the word sorry. Hung Jun made a great effort to send him a slight smile. Seeing Li Jinglong this upset made his own wounds seem trivial in comparison. After a long time, Hung Jun said to Li Jinglong, "We're still alive." Li Jinglong nodded and looked towards Yazi, who had immersed itself within the blood pool, as well as Suani that had walked away to higher ground. In this situation, where they didn't know Atai's whereabouts, they had to first figure out a way to save themselves. What can I do? Li Jinglong spoke very quietly. Hung Jun asked quietly, what about them? Their gazes turned towards Chu Yangxi and Emorigen in the corner. In reality, ever since Hung Jun had arrived in this place, the other two hadn't let out a single sound, as if they were completely unconscious. Li Jinglong said very quietly, the Fox Yao sucked away their magic, and they both fainted. Hung Jun suddenly remembered that Li Jinglong was immortal, so Lady Qiaoqiao hadn't used her skill to extract and absorb his cultivation. Can you get the throwing knives? Hung Jun spoke quietly. So we can ambush them. Li Jinglong lifted his right hand, indicating that Hung Jun take a look. His fingers had been broken, and they were twisted backwards in a horrifying manner. When Hung Jun saw that, he felt a pain that pierced his heart, but Li Jinglong shook his head and said, "It already doesn't hurt anymore. Don't be afraid, let's first dress the wound on your arm." Hung Jun murmured, "If we wait a little longer, maybe my strength will come back. There is still hope that I can call the throwing knives back to me." "How long do you need?" Li Jinglong asked. "Lady Qiaoqiao will probably return very soon." Hung Jun had never encountered such a situation where he had lost all of the energy in his body, and after waiting for a good long while, his magic and cultivation still hadn't recovered at all. His entire body felt soft and limp, and perhaps he would never be able to use magic again. "It probably won't be like that." Hung Jun comforted himself. When Chongming had taught him to use artifacts, he had said that spiritual qi was naturally born from the meridians, and it was constantly being replenished as it flowed endlessly in him. As long as he spent time cultivating, then it would never disappear. I don't know, Hung Jun said anxiously. Li Jinglong indicated that Hung Jun should calm down a little, using the two broken fingers of his right hand to gently grasp Hung Jun's hand, before saying, "Help me out. I'm counting on you." Hung Jun looked at those broken fingers, and he really didn't have the heart to do it, but Li Jinglong indicated that he shouldn't be afraid. Hung Jun hesitated for a moment, before he turned his hand over and grabbed Li Jinglong's slender, long index and middle finger, forcibly wrenching them back into place with a swift motion as they let out a crisp sound. Li Jinglong almost fainted in that instant, his left palm wrapped around his right hand as his body curled up slightly. He panted, open-mouthed, and only after a long while did he recover. Throughout the entire process, he didn't let out a single sound. "Does it still hurt?" Hung Jun asked anxiously. Li Jinglong struggled to move his fingers, before saying quietly, "The fractures are near the knuckles. I can manage to move them, but I can't put any strength into them." His breathing calmed down a little, and he asked, "Hung Jun, I remember that you said before, the heart lamp is in my body? Right? Do you still remember that?" End chapter.